Posted by you/a helpful Jake Park, Maine. Deep sea divers, what are your horror stories? Diving the day before a hurricane on a small South Pacific island. Out of nowhere, a black and white sea snake, venomous, wrapped itself around my arm. Apparently this happens from time to time before major storms. They can sense it and look for things that are heading towards the shore so that they don't have to put in so much effort to get out of the sea. As soon as I was in the shallows, it uncurled and headed up the beach where it hid under a breadfruit tree. I thought I was going to get bitten to death by a snake at sea. Turns out I was just a taxi for a very calm but rather rushed reptile. Well, here is my story. I was diving in a local pond with a group of much more advanced divers, cave divers, than I, just an advanced certification at the time. I am leading the dive, as to get used to pressures and responsibilities of heading the procession, they are mentoring me. It is a Texas puddle, visibility 10 feet max, not too deep, maybe 25 feet. The known horrible visibility makes it impossible to navigate by compass. We follow a line, string, put by other divers. These lines go from one sunken item to another. So, I know I am about to hit a small sunken boat, don't remember which one, there are a few similar in a row in a same state of decay. So, I am first in the group, I get to the boat and see someone's black army boot sticking out from the inner quarters. Curious thing is, it looks somewhat new, not like items you find on the bottom. Hard to see, too much muck in the water. So, I touch the boot, thinking it is by itself, but it won't lift, like it is attached to something heavy. I put my hand further in and feel the leg continuing out, pants, the calf, and I see the second leg now. Fuck with a big letter F, right? I turn around and show a sign for the emergency ascent to the group behind me. Everyone has a sour face, no one wants to surface, but it is a rule that if one says up, others in a group must abort, no questions. They wanted me to explain with signs why, but what is a diver's sign for a cadaver? I feel like I rush toward the surface, even though trying to stay calm and take time. So, we are on the lake's surface, I have this adrenaline rush, can't breath enough. So, I tell them there is a body down there. I see rolling eyes from everyone, once they see I am serious. A fun bunch, right? So, I describe in detail what I saw. We go down, I don't lead anymore, we make a group search pattern for the line. But once we locate it, we don't know if we should go forward or backwards, as there are a number of boats on the line and who knows in which the body is in and how far we drifted while talking it out on the surface. Well, we find all boats before finding the original one, of cause. So, our customary leader goes into the cabin of the boat and we wait. I'd say he was rather courageous at this point, went right in. Then he emerges from the cloud of muck and tells us all to surface. So, gluing information together from what we learned later on. Turns out the police or some other agency had a body recovery training in the same lake the same day. When they went for lunch, they stuffed their fully dressed anatomically correct rubber doll in one of the sunken boats for a few hours for safekeeping. Well, I died a little that day. Saved someone from drowning while scuba diving. Person had an epileptic seizure at 85 feet of water in a pitch black cavern that I was diving also. I was hovering above just watching the flashlights move about when I noticed one flashlight not moving. I swam down and was met with the other diver with no regulator in their mouth, eyes open and just on their knees. The diver's buddy was next to them and in complete shock to what was going on and was not assisting whatsoever. 15 years of diving and instructor training came over me like it was second nature. I thought her regulator just came out, so I popped mine out and offered it to her, that when I noticed she had done mentally checked out. I popped my number 2 regulator in my mouth and attempted to put my number 1 regulator in her mouth, but her teeth were completely clenched. I then pressed the purged button to get air into her mouth and noticed her cheeks moving, so I know air was getting in there. That was good enough for me. I then grabbed her under her arm and get the regulator flowing in her mouth and swan to the opening of the cavern and then up over 60 feet to get her to the surface. One on the surface did everything I was trained to do, inflate BC, dumped her weights, got her on her back and started towing to land. As I'm towing her in, she is regurgitating all the water she swallowed and inhaled, it seemed like gallons of water. Got her to land where other divers assisted me in getting all her gear off. She was breathing fine and alive but in shock for a while and slowly came around like nothing happened. We were very lucky that we were only 10 minutes into the dive, or for sure we would have both been bent and spending time in a hyperbaric chamber. The crazy thing is she didn't tell anyone she had epilepsy, and when we later reviewed her consent form she checked off no to epilepsy. I put myself at risk shooting up to the surface like that, but if I came across that situation again I would not hesitate to save someone's life. Not my story but my parents. They like to scuba dive when traveling and have gone several times over the years. Once they visited Mexico and went diving there before I was born. I'm not sure where they were exactly, but my mom was slightly lower down than my dad and looking at the ocean floor. He was looking up and around. My mom had on a gold necklace that was floating in the water around her. It was a sunny day and a fairly shallow dive, so it was sparkling. From my mom's POV, she was going along having a grand old time looking at the sea critters below, when suddenly my dad grabbed her and started frantically shaking her arm to get her attention. She looked up and a barracuda was directly in front of her, closer than was comfortable and staring intently, scary teeth on full display. It was focused on the shiny necklace and was just hovering there, transfixed. She slowly moved up her hand to cover the necklace and they slowly and calmly moved away from it and it took off without bothering them anymore, but still pretty unsettling and taught my mom to be a little more aware of her surroundings when diving. I got the bends once. I was careful. Followed my charts and my computer. Had appropriate depths and surface time. But I didn't drink enough water, so I was all out of whack. Felt fine until I got home, mild headache. Then I woke up and it was just pain in my left arm. Elbows. Fingers. Couldn't even bend them without bad pain. My headache was intense and I was so dizzy. Called my older, more experienced dive buddy and I got rushed to the hospital. Docs got me hooked up in fluids, checked my dive logs while the decompression chamber was set up. And then got me in there with a nurse. 8 hours in a tube about the length of a car but as wide as maybe a double bed. I was on oxygen and hooked up 2 and 4 and it was so loud, with all the air rushing in. As soon as I got to depth the pain vanished. It was crazy. I'm fine now obviously. But I wasn't allowed to dive for a month, which sucked, but hey. The dives were pretty great. Free dove to about 160 feet in Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. It's where a lot of the free diving world records are set, super neat place, Google a picture. Anyway, I'd never really been past 100 feet freediving, but this was the perfect place to do it. No current, there's ropes to keep you straight and allow a slight pull back up. Scary part is that you become pretty strongly negatively buoyant after like 60 feet, so you're basically hauling ass down while doing nothing and using very little air. So I'm dazed out a bit, feeling good and counting the lines that mark depth, and all of a sudden feel pressure like my trachea is going to collapse and wake up and realize I've counted to the line that's around 160 feet or so. Very scary moment because I wasn't sure if my body could take the depth or if I had gone too far and wouldn't have enough air to get back up, which is a much slower and more air-intensive process. I wear contacts, so getting water in my mask is extra bad as I can't open my eyes underwater. Shortly after being told about a shark colliding with my friend from behind and removing his mask, I am pretty scared about this, not sharks in general, and I see a shark heading for me. They are curious, they often shoulder bump you as they turn at the last second. But she wasn't changing course. I stayed calm and still as long as I could, and at the last second before she hit my mask I ducked. Except instead of ducking under, I just headbutted her right in the nose. Everyone saw and thinks it was the funniest thing ever. I may be the only person alive who headbutted an 11-foot shark in the nose, but it was because I was scared she would take my goggles off. Not me, but my brother, and not deep sea, sorry. He was 18, part of the dive club at his school. They went on a diving trip. The crew that handled the dive counted heads wrong, and halfway through the dive the boat went back to shore without them, so there they were 2 kilometers from shore with their only option to swim back. There were about 5 of them, 2 girls 3 guys. All of them between 15 to 18 years/0. About halfway through, one of the girls couldn't swim anymore and started crying. My brother along with another guy swam with her, dragging her along, making sure she didn't drown. Everyone made it out okay. Worst part, school tried to hide it, and had the audacity to suspend my brother from school for catching him with a beer while on the trip. Needless to say, they were in deep shit when it came out. Not sure exactly what happened though. Throwaway account, as this story is well known among my circles and it would be easy to identify me. I grew up in Oz. When I was 15, I took the family boat out and dove the reef myself to clear my head, mistake number 1. I was down at a depth of about 28 meters 90 feet when I was only rated for 60 feet, mistake number 2. Whilst diving, I spotted a 3.5 meters mako shark coming right at me. For those who are unaware, makos are basically the cheetahs of the ocean, and they only have 2 speeds, curious, harmless, and lunch, very much harmful. This guy was in lunch mode. So I hovered, as I had been trained to do, as there would be no way for me to outmaneuver it or escape it. Nowadays, we dive with shark shields, which emit electronic pulses that freak the sharks out and keep them away, but back then, What we used was essentially a chainmail sleeve. The idea being that sharks hate the taste of metal, so if you give it your arm, it'll bite down, decide you're gross, and move along. So I wait, and it comes, and I do a perfect move to give the beastie my arm. Just before the cronk, however, it occurred to me that I had left my sleeve on my bed, mistake number 3. I had my kelp knife drawn, and stabbed it right as it bit me. It swam off, and I was alive. However, now I had a series of problems. I had huge open gashing wounds on my arm from the bite in open water, and was trailing blood everywhere. Once the shock wore off, you realize that you're in salt water, and salt and open wounds don't feel good. In a panic, I dropped my weight belt and shot up to the surface without any sort of waiting period. Hello bends, mistake number 4, because I hadn't been paying attention to the currents. I was approximately a quarter mile downstream of my boat, which means I had to swim up to it, mistake number 5. When I got to the boat, I really started to wish I had done as my dad had said and had the comms fixed, mistake 6, or that I had upgraded the first aid kit like I had been threatening to do, mistake 7. So I end up racing back to shore with nothing more than a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding. Long story short, my series of unfortunate self-inflicted events earned me 172 stitches, boatloads of physical therapy because the shark had actually bitten down on my tricep and detached it, and easily identifiable scars on one of my arms for the rest of my life. Oh, and I lost my deceased grandfather's favorite kelp knife that he had left me. I wear heavy prescription lenses and can't wear contact lenses. Halfway through a week-long liveaboard dive trip, someone dropped a tank on my prescription mask and shattered it. I usually had a second set with me, but could not find them and only brought one, because hey, nothing had ever happened before. I am functionally blind without corrective lenses. I can see colors and that's about it, starting about 5 inches from my face. I was devastated, but decided to go diving anyway, with my husband as my seeing eye diver. I could see my gauges, so I felt reasonably safe. It was among the most amazing 3 days of diving I've ever had. I saw the colors, shapes, and movement. Without being focused on the details, I actually took many of the best underwater photos I'd ever taken. I wasn't worried about focusing on a particular coral or fish, I was looking at the larger color patterns. So it didn't turn out to be the disaster I thought it was. Not exactly deep, but I was doing my certification dive for my POTI Basic Open Water Diver certification. I was at about 35 feet when my regulator started free flowing. We'd been taught to put our tongues against the roof of our mouth to still breathe in that scenario, and it worked just fine in the 70-degree pool. Unfortunately, I was in a 40-degree lake, the temperature of which adds a bit of stress and anxiety no matter the depth. I was fine until the tongue technique didn't work and I grabbed my backup regulator. When I tried to clear it of water and breathe from the backup yet still managed to suck water, I panicked. Thankfully, it being a certification dive and all, there was a dive master with my little group. I signaled an emergency ascent and he and I shot to the surface. I was in a complete panic like I've never known before or since. I was convinced I was dead. Once we got to the surface, he was smart enough to reach between my flailing arms and inflate my BCD. After a few seconds he was able to calm me down, but I was unable to complete the dive. Every time my face went under the surface, I started having a panic attack. Eventually I pushed through. Before it was said and done, I got my advanced certification, which involved a dive to 110 feet and a number of other challenges. Unfortunately, after that accident, diving gave me pretty bad anxiety and got to a point where pushing through was no longer worth it. It's been a long time since then and I'm not sure how I'd react now. Maybe after all this time I'd enjoy it again. I'm hardly a deep sea diver. My deepest dive to date is 111. This incident actually happened in about 8 of water. Crystal River, Florida. Known for attracting manatees in the winter. They don't let you scuba dive there anymore, and the dive master suggested snorkeling this dive because it was shallow and it scares the manatees off. It was my first set of dives out of certification. I was putting my gear on, damn it. So there's 2 manatees in the immediate area. An older juvenile who was hanging out and loving the attention from the snorkelers, and what we assumed was likely his mother. I had a little disposable underwater camera. As soon as I hit the bottom, the big one approached me. I moved the camera out of my face and she just got closer and closer, until she literally grabbed the regulator out of my mouth. Luckily my skills were still very fresh in my mind and I calmly grabbed my octo. But I spent the entire dive trying to get far enough away to get pictures of her. She was a nosy pest. I'm a long-time scuba diver, instructor/dive master, and ex-commercial diver. I probably have a few horror stories that would make people's hair curl, diving literally in shit, for example, or helping drag a car with a body inside out of the river, But actually the most interesting story happened when I was on holiday in Turkey and diving over there as a tourist. I had a package booked with this little Turkish dive operator who ran out of a boat moored up just off an island. The dive masters seemed to be a good bunch, and as with all places they took us in for a check dive, which as an instructor it was a formality. So Q day 2, this little island is maybe 100 meters long and you could swim around quite easily. It provides shelter in the lee of the island where the large dive boat is moored up. To get to the dive boat, a small tender picks you up from the beach and we drive across a lagoon. So far so good. We get kitted up on the main boat and then the little tender takes us to a dive site, with everything on except fins, mask and so forth. So we're motoring along, but there's 6 of us sat in this little tender plus the skipper. We get out of the safety of the island's shelter and the sea starts getting choppy. We motor on, but progressively something seems to be happening with the boat. Waves are swamping the front and the water's not coming out, the bilge isn't working. The boat progressively starts to get a little lower in the water, we're maybe 500 yards from the main boat now. I instinctively grab my fins, I know what is about to happen, and shout at my buddy, grab your stuff, which he does. And then the rest follow suit. The engine starts to splutter, I grab my mask and put it on, this boat is sinking fast. 10 seconds later the skipper jumps off the boat as it finally just succumbs to the waves and it disappears under the water, leaving the divers floating with inflated BCDs and the boat slowly sinking to the bottom 10 meters underneath us. My commercial diver kicks in. I say to the skipper, swim back to the boat and ask the captain to send the other tender and some BCDs on it. I knew he didn't have any lift bags. We'll go down and dive it and I'll attach an SMB to it so we know where it is, come back and meet me. He nodded and swam off, and the other dive master went off and dived with the group. While I, as a customer here, and my buddy dived the wreck of the tender we had just been on. I dropped down to the tender, which was leaking fuel, and thankfully sat upright in the seagrass at around 10 meters. I sent up my SMB, safety sausage, and tied it to one of the boards on the deck of the tender. Once we saw the other tender reappear a few minutes later, I slowly ascended with my buddy. We grabbed the BCDs off the chap, and thankfully I had my dry suit hose attached to my regulator, it was my gear. So we took 4 BCDs down and strategically clipped them off to different parts of the boat. I then used my dry suit hose to inflate them one at a time, and slowly the boat lifted off the grass and made its way to the surface. We tied a rope to the bow and the other tender towed it back round to the main boat. Thankfully I had enough gas left where my buddy and I finished the dive by swimming back to the main dive boat underwater. Suffice to say, I had a few more dives with them, including an amazing night dive experience where the whole sea was fluorescent and I didn't pay for a thing that trip.